In this section, I'm going to talk about the actual art of teaching in an international school. I'll talk a little bit about the makeup of students, and I want to reiterate what I said before. Students generally, in my experience, have been about 25% from the United States, 25% from the host country, wherever you're living, and then 50% of students from all around the world. Oftentimes, there's a pretty good contingent of students from South Korea and many from Europe as well. Don't find too many from Africa in the schools I've been in, unless I've lived in Africa 3 times, but I don't see many students from outside of Africa. Never judge a book by its cover. Some of the best students you'll find from some of the most desperate places on earth, and you'll find other students who come from super supportive, maybe very wealthy families that just don't live up to what they are, what you think they might be in terms of their academic skills and grit, we might say. You will also find that when you get your class list, you're going to see names that you may not have ever seen before. Students will oftentimes come in and they'll say, I don't go by that. My English name is Jack, or my English name is Kent. Actually, nobody ever says that, but people will say like Jack or John or things like that. So students, again, are super diverse learners. Some will try super hard, and others may not try very hard at all. Trend that I'm not really proud to have seen is that sometimes students in international schools, the ones that started that's in kindergarten and are going all the way through, many of those students tend to have the least desirable skills I've seen in my students. That might just be me personally, I'm not sure. Again, your class size is going to vary. I have taught classes as small as like 5 or 6 students in high school for an elective. I taught one class. I started with 10 students, and after all the adjustments that happened in the first couple weeks of school, I literally had a different set of 10 students for that same class. So I started with one group and ended with another group. Most of the students I had taught them in other classes, they either knew me or they didn't know me, so some probably liked my styles, others didn't, whatever the case may be. You'll have lots of fluctuations in that. In elementary school, be rare to have more than, I think, 20 students. In some contracts, they will actually say how many students you can have. High school classes are oftentimes, especially up in those upper level classes, 15 would seem like a pretty normal sized class. Overall, students you're going to teach probably in middle school or high school, somewhere around 70 to 100 students total, I would say, would be a general makeup. In some cases, it might be a little bit lower than that, but usually not much higher than that. So you're gonna have to do assignments and things that might be a little bit different than what you did maybe in a public school in the United States, where you're teaching 150 of the same students every day. As far as grading goes, in general, grading is pretty similar. Standards-based grading seems to be the trend that is happening now in elementary schools and middle schools, and in high schools it's starting to creep up a little bit there, but high schools tend to use more of a traditional grading system. If they are an IB school or an AP school, or sometimes even both, they might use those programs to provide grades for students that can apply to U.S. Colleges and universities. For that matter, most schools will have a college counselor, especially schools that are a little bit bigger than that one class. The small schools, medium and other schools and bigger schools will definitely have a lot of colleges. You won't have any college visits, or very few for that matter. Discipline usually is not too much of an issue in international schools, although it can be in certain places and in certain schools. I mentioned before, administrators oftentimes don't have too much of a backbone, but they oftentimes don't need it. You can oftentimes handle situations with an email to a parent, or a conference with a parent, or meeting with a student, setting clear expectations. You will have some students that just don't get it. Some students will be asked to leave schools, although that is pretty rare. You'd be surprised, working with as many schools as I have. I've oftentimes participated in boards as either a faculty representative to the board or something of that nature, and internships, those types of things. You would be surprised how thin a margin a school has in terms of, oh my gosh, these students are paying $30 or $40 or $50,000 a year to go to the school. Well, they're also paying 70, 75, 80% of that tuition money goes to teachers, to recruit teachers, to pay for their housing, to pay for their training, to pay for all the resources that come. So these schools oftentimes need just about any student that is willing, whose parents are willing to pay the amount for that school. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's the reality of international schools. Some schools, 10 students might make the difference between being able to hire a art teacher for the secondary or an art teacher for the whole school, which could have a big follow down impact on a lot of things. And finally, I did mention this before, but I wanted to talk about the calendar and often the schedule as well. Schedules can vary greatly around the world, but it seems to be that a lot of schools are using like an A-B schedule in the middle school and the high school, where you'd have 4 classes on day A, another 4 classes on day B. Sometimes those rotate. Lunch, recess, or free time are usual for that. You might have a lot of students out for different sporting events or different plays or whatever the case may be. I think when I lived in Austria, one of the counselors did a study and found that there were only like 10% of the days where no students where all students were accounted for in the classroom. That might have been very small groups that left for different reasons, but that not for sickness, but for school related activities. Generally speaking, your school will require you to be there right before school starts, and you can leave right when it ends. You might have an after-school activity that you're required to do 1 or 2 trimesters of the year. Most schools do sports by trimesters and activities by trimesters, so you might be contractually obligated to do that. You also might get a supplement for things that you do outside of the school. And again, your schedule, when you're off for the summer, you're off for the summer. Schools will oftentimes tell you to leave a personal email address and a phone number to reach you, and then you'll be gone on June 15th, and they won't expect you to come back until the middle of August after teachers, when the first day teachers are required to be there. I'll get to this later, but I just want to finish with, when you are a new teacher, you oftentimes will be asked to come a week or so early to do some of the onboarding with the school, which is normal, and get your housing and all of those things. So schools will help you with all that, so not to worry about that. I did want to leave you with one more piece of homework before we move into the next section, which is about living overseas and getting hired and all that stuff. I'd like for you to think about training. What type of training does your current school offer, or what type of training can you get now that will help you to succeed in an international school? If you can take IB training, that would be my number one advice to you is get IB training. Schools really like IB training for their teachers, and if you have it, you're just one step ahead of other teachers. If not, think about what you can do in terms of helping to make it an equal playing field for all the different students from all the different backgrounds. So anything that deals with English language learning or learning support or something like that might also be worthwhile to look into if you have choices. Would I go out at this point and spend $2,000 going to an IB training in Taos, New Mexico? Probably not. Would I ask my school if they would sponsor it? Yes. So that's where I want to leave you at. With that, our next section, chapter 6 or part 6, is going to be the pros and cons of living overseas. So this is outside of school, but just what's it like to live overseas? What are the good things and what are the bad things? So take care, and I'll see you in the next video soon. Bye-bye.